надо думать уже, если станет такая ситуация, о всеобщей мобилизации. Собрать примерно армию, пару миллионов, да поставить их всех в такую позу, из которой они никогда уже после этого не выйдут. Никогда. Либо они заткнутся, либо они действительно потеряют даже то, что у них есть. И после того, как они захотят с нами схлестнуться, Европа и большая часть европейских государств перестанет существовать как таковая.
You can say, he doesn't mean that. It's just bluster. Maybe it is. I don't know. I can't get inside his mind to figure out what he's saying. All I can tell you is what he said. And what he said, if you look at the spreadsheet, should alarm you. If you're Europe, you should say, okay, you know what? This is a dumb road we're going down, which can't succeed. It can't succeed. We've tried everything in the world and all of it backfired. And now Russia's stronger and getting bigger by the day. And listen, let's just look at some of the key aspects. Let's look at the 30,000 foot level of the spreadsheet, because we can do that pretty quick. On the Russian side, they are in a wartime mobilization right now, industrial. They haven't even, other than one short one in, I believe it was October 2022, where they had a 300,000 force mobilization. All the rest of it has been just people signing up. They've been recruiting. People have been willing to sign up. They haven't been forced into it. But they could, if they wanted to, if they felt the need to, they could launch a full-time wartime mobilization. They are in a wartime economy or something close to it. Apparently, from some I've talked to, it is like 75%. It could go higher, and they could get a full wartime mobilization. That would be like what the Ukraine side has done. They're in full mobilization mode. They have what is that called? The martial law. So literally everything has come under the orders and command of the president. Russia never did that. They don't have martial law. They still have open borders. They still have people can come in and visit the country, and they only have people mobilized. That's the reason why they call it a special military operation. It's not just an eye-rolling kind of euphemism for war. It actually has very quantifiable legal issues and ramifications inside of Russia, and they are stopped short of it, but they could go to it. And by the way, it wouldn't be like what the Ukraine side is doing right now. When they have their forced mobilization, they're grabbing dudes off the street, physically grabbing them, people with no experience at all. They've gutted through whole categories of their population. And now they're thinking about going to the lower levels, the guys who have no experience of any sort militarily. Russia's not like that. So number one, they're whatever it is, 140 million population. And they have of their, it's like 20 to 40 million military age males from which they could draw. So they could go to a forced mobilization, and they wouldn't just grab people off the street. They would get people, because the Russian system is different than ours. They have kind of like not a recruiting, forced mobilization, or a draft. Sorry, couldn't think of it for a second. So they have this kind of a draft situation where men have to serve a certain amount of time, and then they go back into their civilian lives. They have recruits that they have that don't actually fight in the front war. That's for the people who volunteer. Those guys serve in the continental country, and they're basically for the defense of their country. So all 3 years of this war, there has been 1 year increments where these guys come in, they train, they form up, and they obviously are learning the model of the current warfare, and they've adjusted their tactics, etc. They're getting trained, and they go back into civilian life. So there are millions of guys in the Russian side that have a level of military experience and training. If the president of Russia gave the order, they could be quickly mobilized in, put back in uniforms, and now then they can actually engage. If he then declares a full war, if he declares martial law, now then that law would change. But they have millions of people with some military training. So they wouldn't be starting from scratch. That's important to know, because let me continue on with the Russian side. They also have a wartime defense industrial base in. They were caught short when this war started because they didn't expect to have to fight a long war. They thought it was going to be a shock and awe kind of thing, and that the Ukraine side would capitulate, much like what we did in Iraq in 1991 and again in 2003. You had like a month of fighting. The shock and awe of the United States compelled many of the Iraqi units not even to fight, and so that war was over quickly. Russia thought the same thing, so their defense industrial base was still at a peacetime level. that got shattered when the Ukraine side fought ferociously and showed the Russia that they are not going to succeed there. And it took them a good solid year and a half, maybe 2 years, to really get all that stuff retooled, to get the inputs going, to get the raw materials imported from the various sources, whether inside or outside of Russia, et cetera, hired the people, built the factories, all that kind of stuff, get the tools and machine things made. All that takes a long time to do. And finally, Russia had it done. Now they're there. So they have a wartime defense industrial base now. They have drone production, missile production, artillery production that's like through the roof, because those are the main tools of war. Let's look at the European side. The European side is in a peacetime economy. They have no mobilization process. Their defense industrial base is slightly elevated from what it was before the war started, but only incrementally so. Their production of drones, missiles, and artillery, the same categories, are far, far, far less than the Russian side, like tiny fractions of what the Russians are producing, because Russia's in a war. France isn't, UK isn't, Belgium isn't, none of these countries are. So, of course, they may produce a little more because they think it can be some money, but it's only incrementally more. Definitely not enough to sustain a long war against a nuclear superpower. That's what would have to be produced here. And probably the single biggest category is that they have, on the European side, they have no combat experience. Whereas the Russian army as an institution and many of their key leaders at all these different levels had experience before, they had training, etc. Now then they have fresh combat experience to add on top of that. So that now then they continue to replicate themselves and to get stronger, bigger, and better, more tactically capable, not even just the tools and the weapons of war, but also in the application of those things. All of those things are on the Russian side of this spreadsheet. And the European side just doesn't have it. Gary, if you can throw up that graphic I have here, this is also one of the things, just the number of troops themselves. You see there that the United States is there on the top with a total of 1.3 million active forces. But I put in the red box there basically the biggest of the European. And you see Poland has 200,000 troops. France has around 200,000. UK goes 184. But as we've talked about, they don't even have a single functioning armored division. So they have a number of people, but their fighting formations are terrible. Everything goes down from there. You see down to Hungary, they got 41,000. And I've told you that the sum total of all the Baltics is basically a handful of battalions who don't have anything near what they need with air defense, air capacity, air offense, any of the tools of war, and they just don't even have like tanks, artillery personnel, etc. They are not prepared for war. Nobody in the European Union is. Nobody in NATO is ready for an actual war. Russia is in a war. So everything that you can imagine is on the Russian side. Trump apparently sees the spreadsheet. So he's willing to take a lot of political heat, even when all of these people in the United States from the previous administration, those who love war, or like 90% of Europe, unfortunately, really Hungary and Slovakia seem to be the only exceptions, maybe Turkey too. They're definitely not involved in this. They're paying attention down in Syria. We'll talk about that more on another show. But in terms of this war here, other than a lot of talk, the European side does not have the capacity to war. I don't know if they're still trying to do the Biden thing of just pushing right up to the edge, but they don't actually want a war. I mean, it would be insane if they did. I hope they don't. But this is having a negative impact on the Russian side. I showed you that clip there of General Aptia Ludinov. We may have him on our show here coming up soon. We're still trying to work that out because we want to ask some hard questions on that. But just that clip that we got pulled there off the Telegram channels, you can see that is what they're thinking. And I can assure you there's long been a lot of competition inside Russia with the war hawks, but you've seen this on their national media. You certainly see it on Telegram channels that there is a big dispute within even the Politburo, within the Kremlin itself. A lot of hardliners are upset at Vladimir Putin because he's kept the gloves on. They said, dude, take the gloves off. We have a lot of this capacity. Many people see that the Russians have been relatively slow in their methodical move to the West, and they think that's because that's all they can do. There has been no attempt at a large-scale offensive by the Russian side since the initial one in early 2022. They have had this small unit level stuff that puts constant pressure on and causes attrition on the Ukraine side. And they've been content with that so far. But they have much larger forces. I showed you a clip from a Russian news source about 10 days ago that shows that there are about 200,000 troops that are available for an offensive. There may be one coming in the spring. Zelensky told you there was about 150,000 in the northern part, north of the Sumy area, that could come down south. So various sources are already saying, to include the western side, that there's a lot of Russian capacity there that has not yet been used. And we don't want to get into position to have them use it. The only thing that can stop that right now is if President Trump's view makes it. If President Trump either compels the European Union and Ukraine to come to an end, and he's trying to compel it right now by holding the intelligence, by holding the ammunition supplies, etc. That's not pernicious. That's not taking Russia's side. That is trying to use that tool before to force the Ukraine side into recognizing the truth. So you have guys like Bolton who keep saying, "Oh, this is just about Trump taking the other side, and he's whose side is he on?" All this kind of stuff. That's absurd. That's an elementary. That's an amateur view of things. It is. It's an amateur view. It's somebody who's a good talker and an idiot. And I'm sorry to use that strong language, but that's the case right now, because the consequences of them getting their way is yet more death and destruction in Ukraine, and gone far enough, expanding that death and destruction into Europe. And now then, if Russia ever does take that risk, say to take the Baltics, because those are the easiest targets, and that 150,000 troops that are north of the Ukrainian border could just turn and go north instead of south. And there is absolutely nothing the Baltics could do to stop that. Of course, then you have Article 5 will actually be employed, and there will be no shortage of people who will be immediately saying, use tactical nuclear weapons against Russia. And then you will have the president of the United States, the leader in France, the leader in UK, where they also have nuclear weapons. They will come under enormous pressure to use them. And I will just say right now, categorically, if we get into that position, if Article 5 is invoked, and if Russia has attacked a NATO country, I will say categorically the absolute worst thing we could ever do is to use nuclear weapons, to be the first to use them. It would be suicidal. It would take a situation that will be really ugly. If Russia took that easy target and took out the Baltics and started attacking them, to use nuclear weapons in that case would be suicidal for us. You can't undo the damage that will have been done then. There's virtually nothing conventionally we could do. There's been studies of that done by Iran in, I believe it was 2016, that conclusively showed that. And that's even before Russia had all of its capacities it has now. It would be an even worse defeat in that case. And even though Article 5 would be called, we simply cannot escalate. What we need to do then is just seal off the damage and prevent it from going any worse. And we don't have the capacity really even to seal it off. If Russia pressed a bad situation and made it worse, they could go in conventionally. And I'm telling you, if it goes nuclear, we simply cannot go down that path, because now then you're talking Berlin, London, Dallas, Texas, San Francisco. I mean, God only knows. Nothing will be off the table. You can see them incinerated. And why would we want to ever risk a single Western city for the foolishness of the European leaders who are taking us down bad pace right now?